Hello everyone. From Rome, Italy, I bid you a warm welcome to ICROM's webinar series on global voices, heritage, and pandemics. I'm Aparna TANDON, and I'll be hosting this webinar on behalf of ICROM team. Conceived within the framework of ICROM's flagship program on first aid and resilience in times of crisis, this is the sixth webinar of the series on heritage and pandemics. First Aid and Resilience is a multi-partner program and aims to build capacity for effective disaster risk management for all forms of cultural heritage. It affects on-the-ground change through training, in-field applications, self-help resources, and by developing a robust network of mentors, cultural first aiders, and change agents. Today, our network spans 500 in 78 countries, and it consists of 500 cultural first aiders. And a strong and still evolving component of the First Aid and Resilience program centers on community-based disaster resilience. It addresses all risks to heritage, including those stemming from conflict or fragile context. The webinars on heritage and pandemics are meant to offer a platform for our former participants, mentors, and leaders to share experiences and offer strategies for response as well as recovery for heritage and associated communities from the ongoing pandemic. ICROM is grateful to all its partners, and in particular to the Swedish Postcode Foundation for enabling this exchange. Before moving on, I would like to mention that as in previous webinars, you can send your queries and comments by clicking on the Q&A icon that you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. We will take up some questions after the presentation, and in case we are unable to answer all the questions due to the shortage of time, we will respond to them via email in 2 weeks' time. The topic of today's webinar is traditional knowledge for building resilience. Traditional knowledge is know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its cultural or spiritual identity. Today's discussion will highlight what role such knowledge systems, which are termed as non-formal knowledge systems, play in building communities' resilience. Our moderator for this discussion is Barbara MINGUEZ GARCIA, who's a disaster risk management and cultural heritage specialist, consultant at the World Bank and GFDRR. And Barbara is one of the mentors for the ICROM First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis program. She has participated in the international training course on disaster risk management of cultural heritage at the Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, which is another training program in which ICROM partners in with the Ritsumeikan University. And she took this course in 2016. She's also a member of the ICOMOS International Committee on Risk Preparedness, which is called ICORP. And without further ado, I now hand over to Barbara. Over to Barbara. Okay.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Aparna, and welcome everyone to this webinar. The topic for today's session is particularly relevant, and yet is often left out on the initiative that aim to integrate cultural heritage in other sectors, such as disaster risk management. Cultural heritage is usually more recognized in the tangible forms, and to try to make understand not heritage professional what intangible culture is, we usually refer to examples such as religious celebrations, dances, or music. But traditional knowledge, our topic for today, as Aparna said, is often forgotten or not taken into consideration. In fact, this is becoming more significant recently, and we can find several examples of traditional indigenous knowledge in the face of climate change that are not considered by some governments into new policies, planning, or administrative decisions. Traditional knowledge is indeed a source of climate resilience. The heritage transmitted from generation reflect the interaction between the communities and their environment through their own history, at the same time that provide a sense of identity and continuity, and promote respect for cultural diversity and creativity. For instance, the Pacific region brings solid experience in documenting traditional knowledge on weather and climate that is fundamental for forecasting, communicating, and responding to natural hazards. Several indigenous communities have developed knowledge based on the sustainable management of their environment and are capable of observing and interpreting climate phenomena at a scientific level. An increasing number of World Heritage Sites are providing new models of resilience and adaptation through local knowledge and community-based decision-making. For example, in Vanuatu, the cyclone preparedness and response strategy is based on traditional subsistence and construction practices, along with support networks based on community exchange. Applying traditional knowledge related to medicine to this current situation can be very useful on one hand, since there are some practices that help strengthening the immune system. But on the other hand, traditional practices and practitioners need to be open to integrate new knowledge from scientific research and, of course, ensure that they are not interfering in the treatment of new disease. Another critical point is the way that traditional knowledge is transferred through generation and the role that the people holding and transferring this knowledge play for their own communities. To explore some examples of the application of this traditional knowledge to the current situation, we are going to travel today around the planet. So we will start in Egypt with Ahmed SULEIMAN. Ahmed is a practicing architect and trained first aider to cultural heritage and an independent researcher and consultant in the field of cultural heritage conservation and management, specialized in post-crisis recovery of cultural heritage. And he is currently based in Sharjah, United Arab Emirates. Previously, Ahmed was assistant lecturer in built heritage conservation at the Department of Architecture in the Faculty of Fine Arts of Alexandria University in Egypt between 2017 and 2019. From Egypt, we will travel to Guatemala with Samuel Franco, who is the director of Casa Collón Cultural Rescue Center in La Antigua, Guatemala. Samuel is also alumnus of the ICRON First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Time of Crisis. Is member of the International Committee of Disaster Resilience Museums and the International Committee of Audiovisual and New Technologies of ICOM. Is board member of the Guatemala National Committee of the UNESCO Program Memory of the World, coordinator of Blue Shield Guatemala, member of the steering committee of the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network, and member of the UNESCO roster for culture in emergencies. After Guatemala, we will cross the Atlantic again to Nigeria to visit Dr. Afolasade A. Shade holds a PhD in cultural property law. She is senior lecturer in the Department of Jurisprudence and International Law and the subdean of the Faculty of Law, University of Ibadan, Nigeria, where she teaches cultural property law and coordinates the Heritage Protection Initiative. She is a Heritage First Aider on the Global Cultural Emergency Response Group, and she served as an international heritage expert at the First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Time of Crisis workshop in Malawi in February 2017. After this world trip, we will dig a little more the connection between traditional knowledge with the disaster risk reduction practices. And to discuss about that, we will have Dr. Repaul KANJI. Repaul holds a PhD on building disaster resilience through corporate social responsibility. He is a research scientist and program manager at the Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management and an integrated research on disaster risk young scientist. He is also the co-founder of the Confederation of Risk Reduction Professionals in India, and he is a first aider to cultural heritage in time of crisis. So let's start our trip, shall we? Ahmed, this virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thanks to Aparna and as well to ICROM for providing such platform and for giving me an opportunity to participate in it. I would like to share my screen. I would like to share my screen now.
So I think we are experiencing some technical problem trying to share the screen. 1 second, please. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can fix this small technical issue. One more try. If not, we try with the second speaker. Fantastic. Now we can see your screen. Ahmed, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So actually, before I bring you a few lessons that I have learned from the Egyptian context, I would like to again highlight the importance of Ikram's initiative to hold this talk, as we have all been living almost in a freezing moment situation all around the globe since the start of the quarantine and lockdowns due to the widespread of COVID-19. Along with its negative impacts on the world's health, economy, and livelihood, such situation carries a great potential for a globally better future by bringing us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that lies in the extended time for all of us, a time to take a step back and reflect on our past, present, and future, while our planet Earth took a break to recover itself. While many among us have been involved on a daily basis in COVID response actions in different ways and at different levels, others also among us were required, while working from home, to think of the question of how our future will be in post-COVID. Knowing that such infrequent crises might still be unfolding and being in different phases in different places around the world, I believe there has been time since the beginning of the spread, only enough to reveal the actual scope of impacts, and for us to be more aware of and able to identify aspects of resilience, vulnerability, and risk in our current social, economic, and cultural processes, systems, and organizational structures, both infra and superstructures. This indicates that now might be an appropriate time to start thinking of post-COVID recovery. In fact, sharing and communicating ideas among local, national, and regional, also global spheres on how our future will be can be considered in itself a psychosocial response during the crisis that can foster resilience in the face of severe economic consequences, as well as the unfolding social, cultural, and political challenges. As Barbara has mentioned, all of us, to a far extent, realize that traditional knowledge is an integral part of the cultural identity and provides a source of livelihood for its bearing communities and individuals. However, I believe we still need to shed light on why traditional knowledge is of particular importance to enhancing the resilience of its bearers to the multifaceted consequences of natural or human-induced hazards. It is a question with a rather broad scope, yet in order for us to touch base of it, we need to establish an on-ground understanding of the very nature and dynamics, as well as the actual scope of traditional knowledge and how it enhances resilience. And therefore, we need to be rather contextual. Seeking a contextual understanding from my own cultural background takes me back to June 1964 in Egypt, when all Egyptian villages along the Nile banks were anxiously waiting for the last visit of the river's annual flood water to their inhabited and cultivated lands. As from the year after onwards, the newly built Aswan High Dam would start to reserve the water, creating a new inland sea behind its wall. Until that date, and since ever, the Nile used to overflow its bed every year from June to September to cover massive areas of Egypt's agricultural land, with silty waters coming all the way down from the high mountains of Ethiopia. Over thousands of years, Egyptian peasants have developed an experiential knowledge of the frequent hazard and adequate response actions. I shall elaborate through some examples of these actions. For instance, they could foresee the start of the flood almost to the hour. However, they could not estimate the amount of increase in the river's water table. Yet, they have become familiar with the possible consequences of a minimum, an average, and a maximum increase, as a minimum increase would be enough to completely submerge farmlands, while an average increase would turn the ground into a shallow sea, bringing large amounts of living fish along and submerging low-level structures. A maximum increase would reach the houses, submerging ground floors, and in many cases leading to partial or total collapses. Initially, the agricultural calendar has accordingly been developed to make the flood time a cultivation-free season, while peasants would use a short time before the flood to prepare the irrigation ditches and divide the land into smaller basins to receive the rising water, which would be reserved for irrigation after the flood. This system was part of a national water management network of canals, locks, and nilometers that controlled the overflow of the flood to keep it within safe limits and distributed irrigation water across the country. The minimum amount of water inundation would be just enough to fill the ditches and basins and naturally fertilize the soil by the washed away silt. Fish brought by an average flood would be collected from the basins, preserved and stored, along with other home preserved and stored food, to be consumed all year long. Inherited techniques would be used to prepare sun-dried or salted fish for long-time storage. Mud, as an annually renewable resource and within reach, was the main building material. Also, inherited techniques for mud brick making and construction would be used to repair or rebuild damaged houses, cowsheds, granaries, and coats. Works of preparing and cleaning the ditches before and after, collecting the fish, and restoring damaged structures would be collectively organized and undertaken mainly by all adult men together, accompanied with young boys for the whole village, while each of the women takes the responsibility of other works within their households, accompanied by their daughters. In fact, the year 1964 marked the actual beginning of an historical transformation in the national response approach, to become the sole responsibility of the state through the ministerial body of irrigation and water resource management by the construction of the dam, from being for thousands of years before a shared responsibility between the community and the authorities. Also, not having the annual flood led to other fundamental shifts for farming communities. For example, in the agricultural calendar, cultivation has been made possible all year long. Also, in the irrigation system and techniques, as the reserved water has become centrally distributed according to the new calendar, and in soil fertilizing, as chemical fertilizers were adopted to compensate for the loss of natural silt coming with flood water every year, and to accommodate the increase in soil consumption due to having 2 to 3 cultivation cycles instead of 1 per year. Indeed, this example is clearly indicative of what traditional knowledge refers to. We often use traditional knowledge as a term with a subconscious agreement that it is limited to the intellectual and life knowledge developed and transmitted informally among members of relatively small rural or semi-urban communities. as the first idea that usually comes to mind is equivalent to indigenous knowledge. This example reveals another type of traditional knowledge that is rather technical and scientific, related to water engineering and management, that has been formally developed and transmitted within the responsible authorities. Correspondingly, the World Intellectual Property Organization gives a definition that allows a broader scope for the term as being the knowledge, know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its cultural or spiritual identity. Regardless of the type and scale of a community, how knowledge was developed, and the means to sustain it and transmit it. The extensiveness of scope of traditional knowledge is accordingly defined as it can be found in a wide variety of contexts, including agricultural, scientific, technical, ecological, and medicinal knowledge, as well as biodiversity-related knowledge. The example can also bring an idea of traditional knowledge as catalyst for resilience, as resilience is described as empowering people to accept, adapt, and move forward, which is crucial in post-crisis recovery, particularly for developing countries, where providing an access for all, especially the physically, socially, or culturally, or economically vulnerable individuals or groups, to healthcare, education, or other services is hindered by gaps in knowledge, in income, or resources. This example highlighted the role of traditional knowledge as a tool that empowered all community members to accept the hazardous situation, adapt to it, and move forward. Such people-centered approach to resilience promotes inclusiveness and partnership of people, especially the vulnerable and marginalized, in almost all processes of production and income generation, in governance and management, as well as in service provision in post-recovery as a means to fill those gaps. In this sense, putting traditional knowledge in the very center of recovery interventions is clearly justified by its potential to directly foster social, psychosocial, economic, and environmental development by providing sources of life knowledge as well as usable material assets. Therefore, reconnecting the people, especially younger generations, to their inherited traditional knowledge becomes essential in recovery, in particular of poor and developing countries, and for the vulnerable and marginalized groups and communities. Through the very same example, it has also been proven that traditional knowledge is rather contextual and continually evolving. It is shaped by the context and responds back to the contexts. Therefore, retaining a living traditional knowledge must be directed towards ensuring and managing its continual development and correspondence, as well as adaptation to the changing context, rather than preserving the knowledge of a specific point in time that has become irrelevant and non-usable in its context. Also, a highly frequent hazard can foster adopting hazard-based systems in post-crisis, where all of their component assets and processes are principally utilized and developed to be response effective. And a large or nation-scale hazard can neither depend solely on top-down or state response, nor on bottom-up or community response, but to incorporate both approaches in a larger response scheme. And finally, the traditional knowledge includes the social systems and processes. Based on these lessons, we can start incorporating traditional knowledge in recovery from currently in place response by using and complementing with existing, if any, traditional systems and practices of social communication and response. Also, through giving due consideration of fostering intergenerational interaction by response interventions, as well as by encouraging response initiatives by individuals or groups within community members. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Let me emphasize a couple of ideas from your presentation that I think they are key. First, the important role that traditional knowledge plays to strengthen resilience to natural hazards in local communities and to help post-crisis recovery processes. And therefore, the importance of documenting and keep transferring this knowledge. And second, how this knowledge, even if traditional, needs to keep evolving and adapting to the contexts that are indeed changing over time. Thank you again, and let's move now to the Americas. Samuel, are you ready to welcome us in Guatemala? All yours. You are mute, Samuel. We cannot hear you. Unmute.
I said good morning in Guatemala and good evening wherever you are. And thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some experiences from this part of the world. Yes.
Yes, we could see your screen. Perfect. Now you are. Thank you, Samuel.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my presentation will be based basically on experience of Guatemala and the Americas, and maybe you will see some slides from other parts of the world, that because our center also does research on the similarities of the different cultures of the world that we have. So I will begin with the ancient civilizations, which they found ingenious ways to fit into the landscape, leaving behind objects and architecture which we admire in great amazement. There is no doubt that there was a great amount of knowledge those days, when we think that there were no construction tools or technology to proceed. As years went by, this knowledge, beliefs, and cosmovision transmitted from ancestors defined the way to live, survive, and die. Everything that most indigenous cultures do is in a circle, and that is because the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. Amerindian cultures coincide that in the global conception of the universe, that in the beginning all of the things, wisdom and knowledge were with the animals. The one above did not speak directly to man. The Creator sent certain animals to tell them that he showed himself through the beasts, and that from the beasts and from the sun and the stars and the moon should man learn. The knowledge to read the skies, the wind, the sea, the fire, and forests, basic natural elements of the planet, gave our early ancestors the knowledge to produce their tools, to build their houses, develop agricultural systems, clothing, medicine, communication, and transportation means. Knowledge that throughout the centuries has been applied, defining people's cultural identity. Mother Earth is a female. Females have their cycle. Nature has its cycle. So we can see all these elements. Mother Earth is a female. Females have their cycle. Nature has its cycle. The knowledge of the relation of human beings with the nature to read the visible and the invisible. So these cycles like earthquakes, floods, volcano eruptions, and like today we have here in Guatemala, the Sahara sand, you know, this, which is affecting a lot of people, and also as well with the COVID-19. So COVID-19 has certainly impacted the whole planet and our ways of living. Remote communities, indigenous communities in Latin America, where the pandemic is currently spreading. They have been figuring out their own ways to protect themselves and their health by implementing the government's recommended biosanitary regulations and local control measures, as well as going back to traditional preventive medicine practices. An Indian theory of existence says, everything on the earth has a purpose, every disease and herb to cure it, and every person a mission. People of the community who was born with the attributes and power to heal and to make holy charms knows that all healing plants are given by the one above. Therefore, they are holy. The use of herbs like eucalyptus, rue, sage, as well as fruits rich in citric, garlic, and ginger to strengthen their immune systems. So traditions are handed from father to son, mother to daughter. The chiefs of communities are considered to be the most learned and the leaders of the tribe or the community. The doctor, medicine man, or medicine woman, however, is thought to have more inspiration. They are supposed to be in communion with the spirits. They cure the sick by laying on the hands and prayers and incantations and heavenly songs. They infuse new life into the patient and performs most wonderful feasts of skill in their practice. He clothes himself in the skin of young innocent animals, such as the fawn, and decorates himself with the plumage of harmless birds, such as the dove and hummingbird. Indigenous community leaders and different countries agreed that this is a call from the spirits. We have abused from Mother Earth. We have taken so much from her and have a debt to pay. We have to sow new seeds and plants to pay back to Earth what we have taken. Mother Earth gives life, medicine, food, and finally, Earth will take us back. In some cultures like this part of the world, we go back to Earth. So there is an alarm. The pandemic has brought the alarm to protect the elders in families and communities. At the same time, elders are advising us in how we may possibly confront the disease. In these times of COVID-19, community leaders agree that their traditional knowledge is very valuable, as well as recognizing the value of modern scientific advances in medicine. Their message is that there is also a need to value and legally recognize their traditional knowledge by scientifics and the academy, as their good practices are not included in the official educational school curriculums or academic publications of universities. A combination of scientific and traditional knowledge could be a way to consider for successful future achievements in medicine. COVID-19 has also arrived in times that thousands of deported migrants are being sent back from USA or Mexico to their countries. Or migrants who have left their countries some years ago but decided to return to their communities because with their families due to the unemployment situation in the US. Community leaders see this as a very complicated situation, but also as an opportunity. The challenge will be to have enough food for the coming season, since grains and local produce may not be sufficient with many people returning to their communities. The opportunity is that the young force of the community is returning. Traditional knowledge like working in the field or working with animals may have never been transmitted to them since they migrated as children or grew up in the United States. Community leaders believe that the knowledge that they have acquired living abroad, as well as their skills with social media, smartphones, and technology, can be combined with the traditional practices of the community and be applied to agricultural and trading activities, being these their main sources of income. Another ancient traditional practice that COVID-19 has brought back to some communities is bartering or exchange. People are trading beans for corn, for example, without the need of using money. This is an old Mayan tradition, you know, the bartering tradition, the bartering in their economy systems. Educational tools have also been implemented some time ago, even before the COVID-19, as disaster risk management educational tools, like similar to the Western risk game, has been adapted to the indigenous languages and environmental and local needs. So this is a way to educate children about the risks, like volcano eruptions, floods, the chopping of trees, the climate changes, and so on. So the elders believe that combining this traditional knowledge and combining the scientific knowledge in medicine may be an answer to this situation. So we have to, the reflection would be that we have to listen and to take into our account the traditional knowledge that has kept these communities for centuries. You know, before there were no doctors, there was no technology, there was no internet. So now they believe that we can join and we can merge all these resources to a better results for the human beings. According to the elders, there is no disease. It is an imbalance that we ourselves have promoted. Same way as we have done with Mother Earth. Natural disasters do not exist. It is us who create them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Wonderful presentation. Let me highlight one idea that Ahmed also mentioned about the importance of combining top-down and bottom-up approaches. And as you said, to integrate the local traditional knowledge with scientific and technology to be more effective fighting crises from natural hazards, climate change, or this COVID pandemic. Thank you again. And keeping that line, let's move to Africa to listen to the experience of Nigeria. Please, Shade, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Many thanks to Ikram and Aparna and Yasmin for making me participate in this webinar and share my experience. I'll be speaking on traditional knowledge and COVID-19 from the Nigerian perspective. And my presentation is on traditional medicine, which is an aspect of traditional knowledge. Traditional healers and healing are embedded in our roots, and they provide the earliest medical care in Nigeria. The Nigerian society is medically pluralistic. This pluralism includes traditional healers as an important group of caregivers who are usually more readily available than the scientific medicine in rural areas. The World Health Organization has recognized the need to integrate the traditional medicine with the scientific medicine when it defines traditional medicine as the sum total of the knowledge, skills, and practices based on the theories, beliefs, experiences indigenous to different cultures, whether explicable or not, used in the maintenance of health, as well as in the prevention, diagnosis, improvement, or treatment of physical and mental illnesses. African traditional medicine practitioners claim that since scientific medicine cannot cure all diseases, they can intervene in the areas where scientific medicine is weak. Patient, you understand the ailment from a different perspective, while doctor and how it is made is known to the traditional healers, and it is also affordable. Over the years, traditional healers have been working in collaboration with doctors to provide a more effective cure and treatment for ailments that have defied medical explanation. Medical science, however, believe that herbs are just immune boosters. Traditional healers' concept of disease is on a wider plane compared with scientific medicine practitioners. This has culminated in some socio-cultural and magical religious practices observed in preparation and use of plant medicines. So due to the partial lockdown in Oyo State, Heritage Protection Initiative Group decided to carry out a survey to determine the effect of COVID-19 on traditional healers in Ibadan, which is the largest city in West Africa. You can see my colleagues and you can see the city behind us. This colleague of mine is involved in cultural and language advocacy, where they carry out regular cultural and language events. With COVID-19 disrupting their activities, they have started virtual book reading on Zoom and Facebook, and they have been recording participation from Yoruba people resident in many foreign countries. So on the 13th of June, 2020, we paid a visit to herb sellers situated in the indigenous part of the country, and we also visited a chief priest, the Aboke of Ibadan land. He anchors the Okebadan annual festival. You can see the priest at the middle of the picture. The Aboke family is known to prepare remedies for the cure of several ailments, notably among which are the viral infections of smallpox, chickenpox, and measles, and other skin infections. Aboke simply means worshipper of the hill. From this picture, we can see the worshipper at the base of the hill, and you can see the deity on top of the hill. These are members of the Aboke family. The family also has remedies available for other infections apart from skin diseases, and they have their members scattered all over the country and also outside the country. Because it is noteworthy that the Aboke is on one of his travels to Brazil, he was able to get some herbs that he needed to produce remedies for some diseases when the stock he traveled with had expired. Using unstructured interviews, we were able to gather the following information: that though COVID-19 infection is a novel infection, it seems that Africans are not as affected as the Western world because Africans have always been exposed to infectious diseases. Unlike the West, we have malaria, upper respiratory tract infections, lower respiratory tract infections, typhoid fever, and some other diseases. Then some of the symptoms of COVID-19 infection are symptoms of some prevalent diseases, such as runny nose, red eyes, skin rash, fatigue, cough, difficult breathing, high temperature, loss of smell and taste, diarrhea, sore throat, chills. And these symptoms have been managed successfully over the years by the traditional healers. So they are confident that COVID-19 is curable by their herbs. However, COVID-19 has affected their sales because of the ban on air travel, which has made it impossible for them to access their customers that are outside the country. Even though many traditional healers fall within the age bracket of those who are aged and more vulnerable to the infection, they are not interested in documenting their recipes, as they are of the opinion that the knowledge cannot become extinct because they have children who have taken after them in the trade, despite these children having their own white-collar jobs and other vocations. The lockdown is causing loss of jobs, but it is noteworthy that these traditional healers have been able to empower their children with skills to serve as a source of income aside their white-collar jobs and vocational trades, which they can easily fall back on in situations of pandemics as we are in right now. It is, however, sad to note that the traditional healers are not adhering to the use of face masks, social distancing, and washing of hands. So it is noteworthy that traditional healers have a lot of influence on the local people, and therefore they need to be sensitized to harmonize WHO guidelines and standards with their perceptions to prevent community spread of COVID-19. So what we have planned to do is that next week, we will be going out again to sensitize them on the need to adhere to the precautionary measures, even though they have the opinion that their herbs can cure COVID-19. We are not disproving that. The only thing we are trying to achieve now is to ensure that all of us do not become sick by neglecting the WHO guidelines and standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shade. Wonderful presentation and very important point that is not only traditional knowledge, but the people who help and transmit this knowledge that are critical to communicate the risk, help setting preparedness measures and spreading at the same time ASEAN good practices and modern behavioral guidelines to avoid diseases. Wonderful, thank you so much. So after those examples and well, knowing that there are many more around the world, I would like to invite Repaul to reflect on the role that traditional knowledge plays to reduce disaster risk in general, and in particular in the face of biological hazards. So Repaul, all yours.
Thank you, Barbara. Good evening from India. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. I would like to thank ICROM for giving this wonderful opportunity to talk about a subject and a topic which is known to all of us, the importance of which we realize very closely, and yet we are here today and we are trying to establish and reinforce its absolute necessity, especially when the world is embroiled in this war against an invisible enemy. I would like to thank Ahmed, Samuel, and Sade for their enlightening narratives, which gives me a perfect context to take my discussion forward. I would not be using any presentations today, and I would like to talk and discuss the issue at hand, the exact way the mighty traditional knowledge of India, the Vedas, were transferred from one generation to the other generation just by listening to it. And hence it was known as Shruti, a Sanskrit word which means what is heard. Since ages, we have been talking about the importance of traditional knowledge in disaster risk management. International frameworks like the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is the guiding light in the field of disaster risk management, expressively emphasizes on the fact and the importance of traditional knowledge and indigenous practices. And yet, examples of traditional knowledge fostering the idea of disaster risk reduction and resilience can only be seen in patches, mostly in the past and very fewer in the present. This is a mystery that I'm yet to solve as a professional in the field of disaster risk management. I'm often bothered by the thought that are we perceiving traditional knowledge, indigenous practices as something which contradicts the pursuit of development? Just to give you an example, you may have come across this debate of traditional construction typology versus modern construction typology, and we get indulged in this futile discussion so much that we forget that the fundamental is it's not about traditional or conventional construction versus modern construction. It's simply the idea of having a good construction and a bad construction. Now, this brings me to another aspect of how we should perceive traditional knowledge. Now, traditional knowledge needs to be understood through a transdisciplinary lens. It can be social in nature in some cases and can be critically technical in some cases. And in most of the cases, what happens is that we do not understand the underlying intricacies, the causalities of it, and we tend to ignore such knowledge. I would like to explain some examples, and I believe I would be able to establish my points through them. We all have experienced lockdowns in some form or the other. Now, let me tell you about the ARCE people of Luzon in Philippines, who practice a very similar kind of quarantine, self-isolation as a way to protect its member during crises or after a tragedy. It's to cleanse, heal, and recover the community spiritually and emotionally. Now, during such a quarantine or such a lockdown within the community, they're not allowed to move out of it. They have plants tied conspicuously at different places at the entry points to the village, which one sees and understands that these are the areas where one should not enter. Now, are these scenes not very common to us? Haven't we seen these kind of scenes very recently when our mobilities were restricted, our entries were barriered, demarcating quarantine zones? Haven't we seen enough of such examples recently? I guess yes. Now, interestingly, some of the ARCE elders claim that they have practiced similar quarantine measures during plagues to drive away bad spirits causing the disease while preventing transmission. Now, all those of you who are very scientifically inclined, I would want them to ignore the part which says bad spirit causing the disease, but I would like you to focus on the part which says that this particular method actually prevented the transmission of the disease. Now, it is today that we have scientific terminologies like total infection rate, or we have different types of simulation models like SEIR model, which tells us how the infection can be transmitted from one person to the other. But back in those days, in these communities, in these indigenous communities, there are no such models, yet there are practices which prevent the transmission of such kind of diseases. So this is very interesting. And having these kind of knowledge already in the knowledge base of the world, have we been successful in implementing lockdowns over the whole world? Well, to my limited knowledge, in most of the cases, no. In some cases, yes. And this is where the concept of resilience blends in completely. As it has been rightly pointed out by Ahmed, resilience is about acceptance, adaptation, and then moving forward. But we cannot adapt a traditional knowledge as it is and expect the same results when we live in a completely different setting. We are living in a modernized world, in a highly interdependent and interconnected world. So what we have to do is that we have to adapt this entire process of traditional knowledge in three simple steps. The first things first, we have to develop a tendency to not ignore such practices or knowledge. It's just because we are incapable of understanding it, we tend to ignore it. But it's something that we need to stop. We need to accept it. The second step is to adapt it according to our present context, because the context keeps on changing. And third, to use this knowledge to bounce back, to move forward to a better state, and being mindful of the changes or the evolution of the knowledge that we are making in the process. Now, there's another thing that I would like to also point out before I conclude my remarks. During the COVID-19 lockdown period, a Native American woman in Minnesota started a virtual jingle dress dance. Now, usually these kind of dances are performed in the powwows by groups of women. But this lady who arranged this jingle dance through a virtual platform, she thought that this is the exact kind of healing the world needs right now. Now, an historian and American Indian Studies professor at the University of Minnesota discovered that these traditions surfaced actually in 1918 during the Spanish flu. And it was accompanied by a narrative of a sick little girl whose father had a dream about a dance that would make her better. Since then, it has been integrated into the culture. This perfectly exemplifies the point that I was trying to make earlier: evolution of traditions, practices, and knowledge. And this also highlights a very powerful notion: the power of tradition and such cultural practices as a tool of fostering hope. Now, in cultures such as these, dancing is actually a prayer. And even in my country, people tend to engage in dancing as a way of respite and hope: hope of a better tomorrow, hope of being able to bounce back, hope of being able to resilient. Interestingly enough, oftentimes these cultural bearers, those who carry such tools of tradition and culture to foster hope and direction, are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by compound disasters like COVID-19 and super cyclone Umpun, many about which you may have heard, which happened a few days, just a month back in the World Heritage Site of Sundarbans in India. Now, there was a particular fellow named Tarun, who was a Jatra artist. Jatra is actually a word which means a folk artist. So there's a narrative about him, and he was standing in front of his trampled home, directionless. Now, can you imagine this? An artist whose song gives courage to thousands of people. It instills spirit in the hearts of listeners. He's the person who felt hopeless. He's the person who felt helpless and directionless amidst a scenario when his profession has been impacted by a pandemic like COVID-19, and now his house is also gone because of the super cyclone. Now, I could go on I could go on continuously about how this person, Tarun's life, how difficult it is, how difficult it was for his parents to get him educated, how he adopted the profession of being an artist after every other employment opportunity failed. But it won't help the cause, because it's not about a single Tarun. There are millions of Tarun. And we cannot talk about resilience if we are not considering the voices of such individuals like Tarun. We cannot talk about resilience if we do not respect the traditional knowledge which is being carried by individuals like Tarun. So basically, to sum it up, there's immense potential in traditional knowledge. And it's not that we do not know it. We are all aware of it. We just need to stop ignoring it and start mainstreaming it. It's not about just the knowledge, but also the voices of millions of Tarun, which goes unheard. And this new normal, once things slowly starts becoming a normal again, that's the new normal. So this new normal is a fabulous opportunity for all of us to start doing it. That is, to not ignore the traditional knowledge, to accept it, to adapt it according to our developing context, and use it to bounce back to a better state. So I guess that would be all from my side. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about a very interesting topic, which is very close to my heart. Thank you. Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Repaul. Wonderful remarks and very interesting examples. And I would like to ask everyone to turn on the camera, please. And I want to thank you all for this fascinating trip in time and space. And we don't have much more time left, but let me go quickly to some questions. And let me start with Ahmed. If you can elaborate a little more in the two types of scope of traditional knowledge that you define in your presentation, you identify as formal and informal. So could you please elaborate a little more there?
Sure, thank you very much. And as I said, within this defined broad scope, we can identify two types of traditional knowledge according to the purposes and the uses. Also the means and the range of communication and transmission among community members. Or we can simply by defining why and what for, or how and to whom and by whom this knowledge is being communicated and transmitted. First, there is the type that can be known as formal knowledge, which is the inherited knowledge that is well documented and studied in various original or historical sources, whether textual, visual, audio, or material, like in historical records, in history books, or archaeological sites. It is the institutionally communicated and transmitted knowledge in a structured manner, like the kind of knowledge disseminated in public or thematic museums, in the diverse education and research institutions, and also through mass media. It is usually the knowledge that is shared at a global, regional, or national level to a general public or among specific, relatively large communities, whether social, cultural, economic, or professional, or even political communities and age groups. And this kind of knowledge mainly serves the purposes of creating, supporting, or justifying, or even encountering specific narratives or ethics or values, and establishing a common historical background and understanding of a specific discipline or a profession or a practice among the members of the concerned communities. While the other type that can be known as informal or group-specific knowledge, which is also an inherited knowledge that is in most cases kept within the minds and memories of elder and senior members of the specific group, and by their practice, it is usually communicated and transmitted orally and by practice learning through a direct intergenerational communication within this community or group. And it's also being shared locally as a continual or inherited systematic process, and mainly in order to support the livelihood and enhance the well-being of young or new members of the respective community. And I hope I answered the question.
I hope so. It was clear. Thank you so much, Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me turn to Shade with a double question. On one hand, if you can explain a little more the traditional healers, if they are exposed also to Western or more formal education. And on the other hand, what is the perception of doctors, the modern doctors, government of other people in general about this kind of traditional medicine?
Thank you. The traditional healers, many of them are exposed to Western education, or should I say some of them in the urban areas are exposed to Western education. But those who are not exposed to Western education, they have their children that they are training in the skills of traditional medicine. Their children are exposed to Western education. Like I showed in my presentation, the Aboke, the worshipper of the hill, he's a retired civil servant. He's exposed to Western education. And then many of his children or the family members, they're exposed to Western education. But this does not prevent them from practicing their family trade. So many of them are also, they are scattered around the country and even abroad. So wherever they are on the surface of the earth, they still practice this traditional knowledge. And then you made mention of the government of Nigeria. I didn't hear that question very well.
What is the perception of people who is not working with traditional medicine? What is the perception, the opinion about this kind of knowledge to be adapted to this kind of situations?
Okay, we have a lot of educated people that also feel this COVID-19 is like typhoid or is malaria. If you go to the general hospitals, if you are sick, you go to the general hospitals and they test you, they'll find out that you have malaria parasites. And then you go to the NCDC for COVID-19 testing, and then they say you have COVID-19. That what is the difference between malaria and COVID-19? So these are issues, but many of us are taking the precautions because we do not want to be the guinea pigs that will be used to test whether COVID-19 is real or not. So many enlightened people are taking to the precautions. But the problem we found when we went to the interior is that because many of the people there rely on these traditional healers, and they see the way the traditional healers are not paying attention to this virus. So they may be tempted to also not take the precautions serious. That is why we said we will go back again to sensitize them on the need to take the precautions of WHO, so that when they, even though they are of the opinion that they can heal the disease, the infection, but if they take precautions, the local people too will be encouraged to take the precautions.
So I understand that they are very well respected in the community, so it's a perfect way to find the balance between the traditional knowledge and the new research. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shade. Let me turn to Samuel. And what would you propose as a tool to increase the transmission and use of traditional knowledge in the years to come post-COVID-19?
Well, I think there are many tools to be done, especially in a country like Guatemala that has 22 languages. And some people only know their language, their native languages. So whatever tool it is made, it has to be like this risk game I presented, which has to be combined with the community. It has to be whatever tool we do. I think I cannot think of a specific tool right now, but I think whatever tool we make, we have to do it with the consent of the community, because they know their needs. We may have the methodology, the scientific and modern method, but I think that the communities people are the ones who should give us all this information to together construct these tools.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me ask one question to the four of you, and you can take turn. I don't mind the order. So how indigenous knowledge contribute to the emergency response phase? What do you think? Who want to start? Focusing on emergency response.
I think we have developed, with the ICROM and the FAC course and all, we have developed excellent methodology, with a team of experts, but we never thought about pandemics. like in this risk game, we should now add pandemics, because they are around. We never thought about this agent of deterioration, as we call them. So I think we have to consider us, from that part of the first aiders to the cultural first aiders, we have to really include add a chapter on this, on pandemics. And that's, again, we have to consult the elder people, the elders of communities.
Any other reaction to this?
Yes, if I may. Yeah, I think as we have been talking, I think all of us, we were we have been revolving around the idea of traditional knowledge being a tool in the hands of people. So speaking of indigenous knowledge, it's not just limited to physical or material life knowledge, but also to what is spiritual, what is somehow metaphysical, or other terms as you might describe it. Within emergency response, there are already operating systems and processes that usually the community works through. So it's just about incorporating us as first aiders, or whoever is responsible for an emergency response, just to incorporate within, just to work collaboratively. Having this perception of partnership, it takes it to a whole different situation. It will support the psychosocial response. It will support also, I mean, the mitigation or just the physical salvage of whatever that needs to be salvaged within an emergency, because it's already operating and it has been proven to be effective if it's already working. So it's not just coming with a parachute and trying to do whatever in the guide book, but also to really look equally to what is already there.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If you allow me, Barbara, I can just cite an example from India. As I said, that traditional knowledge, it's always in our subconscious. We tend to ignore it, but then when we are faced with an emergency, in this case, the pandemic of COVID-19, these kind of knowledges do surface. For example, if I go back to the time when the first few cases in India were reported, there was this cultural shift from greeting everyone. We moved from a millennial way of greeting people with a fist bump or a hand bump to a more traditional way of greeting to namaste. So it's not that this way of greeting was not there or we did not follow it, but it was there in the subconscious. And maybe it was this particular pandemic, this particular scenario, which suddenly, kind of gave it a lot of importance when it surfaced. And it was used as a potent tool to prevent the transmission, specifically in this case of the pandemic. And if we are to talk about other disasters like earthquake or let's say floods, even in this case, the response, just after the response, when it's just the pre-recovery phases, it's basically the culture, the tradition, the practices, which gives you more hope and spirit, to look forward. It glues the entire community, the affected community together, and it gives them hopes to do something better and come out of it. So yes, it has a huge potential, and it is only during times of emergencies, during times of this kind of crisis, that we kind of feel its importance, and then we also adapt it. It's not that we ignore it, but we do adapt it.
Thank you. Any final remark, Shade? You want to jump? Because we are running a little late with time. But... No, you're fine? So anyway, all the questions that are not answered that I see in the chat are many. We can pass to you and we can reply by writing in the next week. So thank you so much to the four of you, and Aparna, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all the panelists for those insightful presentations. Taking it from one of the questions that was asked, how traditional knowledge has contributed to disaster response in particular. There are plenty of examples. One of them is from about storm shelters, which were created in Vanuatu. They're traditional storm shelters, and they have helped to save lives in that country because of periodic cyclones that they experience. And these are storm shelters that can be used now with current technology, as all of our panelists have seemed to be. They have highlighted that traditional knowledge on its own is a source for resilience only if it is adapted, contextualized, because it is not something that is static, but it's dynamic, and it is held by people, and the people who are bearers of this knowledge also have to be engaged, and we have to forge a partnership with them, and many other insights that our presenters today shared with us. With that, I would also like to thank all the attendees. As usual, we have run a little bit over time. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for being with us and for participating in this webinar and raising important questions. I would also like to, at the same time, thank the ICROM organizing team that has helped in the preparation of this webinar. And the recorded version of this webinar will be shortly made available on ICROM website and YouTube channel. The next webinar will be in Spanish, and it will be especially catered to our network in the Americas. And the timing also will be, has been changed a little bit to adjust to the timing of the region. It will be at 4 o'clock Rome time. And we hope to see you then. Thank you so much once again for being with us. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.